as we get closer and closer to the divine, we will see more and more of these symbologies because the water bearer is back. It's going to open an entirely new world.
Welcome to the Deja Blu podcast, where we believe that living a life of magic can be the default. Join us each week as we playfully and authentically dive into the mysteries of life and explore what it truly means to be human. From spirituality, wellness, and all things taboo, we don't hold anything back. So without further ado, let's let the magic unfold. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to another episode of the Deja Blu podcast. My heart is doing baby and massive backflips inside of my chest at the sheer excitement, joy, and celebration of this constellation of individuals that are on the podcast today. This is the first time in this set that we have had 3 chairs, so we have had to push back the golden hands today because we have 2 sacred Tushy guests that are gracing the podcast with their wisdom and everything that they have to offer the world, but also in a very rare and never done before constellation of bringing their brilliant genius minds together in a weaving for an illumination of 2 masters of their craft that are utilizing their findings, their teachings, their philosophies, and their understandings of life and weaving them together in a tapestry to support us with having a deeper level of awareness of knowing thyself and being able to share from that place. So it is truly an honor. I'm going to introduce you both individually. First and foremost, and we will go sort of right to my left, we have in the house Mr. Richard Rudd, which is really, really exciting for me because from the moment, in fact, it was because of the Deja Blu podcast why you are even sitting in this chair. From the moment that I definitely can say that manifested you from an episode that I shared online where I introduced all of my audience to close their eyes and to visualize you and I doing a podcast together and for us to be friends. And 2 weeks after I asked my audience to do that visualization, you popped up into my sphere and all of a sudden we were doing a podcast together, and the next thing we know we're doing another one, and then you came out to LA and then we did an event together, and now we've just become really incredible friends and allies and a support for each other. So outside of that, you are of course the founder of the Gene Keys, which is a living transmission that has single-handedly changed the entire course of my life and have a deeper understanding of turning my greatest challenge into my superpower and therefore serving from that place of, for me personally, my deafness, and turning it into a deeper understanding of learning how to have insight and epiphany in weaving this world through a deeper level of knowledge and wisdom. And outside of that, I would personally have to say that Richard Rudd is one of the most profound minds of our time, while simultaneously being extremely humble and relatable and fun and easy. And so we have the blessing of being able to host Richard at the Queendom, our beautiful home with my sisters, where we are facilitating this experience to create a live event that is happening tomorrow. However, my excitement of bringing you two together, which in a moment now I'll introduce Robert Edward Grant, is also on the podcast, who was just on the podcast recently. And we went so deep at the end of the podcast. If you haven't watched it yet, definitely go over and watch that podcast where you reduced me to tears. I felt so incredibly seen, and the podcast itself was so illuminating and has illuminated the hearts and minds of so many that have tuned into the podcast. In addition to that, he is our modern day polymath. Another one of the most brilliant minds I've ever encountered. This man is a real life Jedi wizard that speaks 8 languages fluently, and he also has been uncovering the mysteries of what is happening out in Egypt, while also balancing a very sweet dance between also being a CEO and businessman of many companies. I can't even keep track of the amount that you are holding, but the vast range in which your genius lies across is truly revolutionary. And so my intention for weaving you two remarkable men together is that you really have both entered into my world and changed the way that I see my reality, and to tap myself into a dimension and a frequency of magic that is so far beyond anything that I could have even comprehended before I even met you two. And so it feels like through your own unique individual philosophies, you are both pointing your finger at the same place. And so in this conversation, my intention is to see how we can create a bridge between your geniuses and your teachings and your findings of what you've been in devotion to and how they meet together. And so I would like to place into the space first is that the one golden thread that I have noticed between the two of you is Hermes. And I'm going to throw out that name first and foremost. So I'd like to hear from both of you. Who is Hermes? And how has Hermes played a role within the creation of your work? And I would love to see how we can create a bridge within this first question. So I'd like to first ask Richard.
Okay, deep end.
Went straight into the deep.
Yeah, and this is not something I've really shared yet so widely. So this will be new to many people. For me, Hermes, it is a transmission. It is a wisdom. It is a living body of teachings. It may have been a being, but it's multiple beings. You know, in its source, I think it's one being. My memory or understanding from my teachings is that their source is from that being we call Hermes, which then, split into many different lineages and traditions and teachings throughout time. And so for me, it was, it's from an archaic period, Hermes, before our memory really is, before our recorded history anyway. And a time period that we might kind of know as Atlantis or another epoch. And probably that epoch is separated from ours by a calamity of some form, which is why we don't have a memory of it. But there are memories always floating around of these things because humans have a knack of finding memories, and particularly the plant realms actually contain the memories of the signatures of everything on the planet. So those people who've ingested certain plants at certain times have the memories come back, and they pass them on through the indigenous lines. So there are memories of these beings and these times, but they're kind of, we have to take them with a pinch of salt and look at them a bit allegorically. So for me, Hermes what is a kind of avatar consciousness. So, and what I mean by that is a fully awakened presence that landed here on the earth, that came from another space-time continuum, you could say, and probably sacrificed a great deal to come here and embody as human. But then, however that worked and whenever that was, and whatever happened in that being's life, what was left behind are a series of teachings or transmissions. Originally there would be like magical transmissions, truths about the universe and how the universe works, and humanity and our destiny and our makeup and our DNA and our geometry and everything, all the interconnected magic that then became the Hermetic teachings, that passed through many lineages into many different storylines. And so all I know is that I was a part of my soul was present when that being was here. And so I have a very, very dim, distant memory of it, but it's strong in me as a presence, even though I don't remember details. So it's not like I can, and I'd be wary about putting together details. So for me, when I had a big experience that led to my teachings back in my late 20s, that was the presence, and those were the memories, the flood that came back into me, that triggered in me, and in time became the gene keys. And the gene keys, just so I'll bring it up to date and then pass over, are an aspect of the teachings of that being. And they pass through, as I said, many traditions, including Egyptian and all kinds of different teachings, and were laid down from that period. but essentially it's about the makeup of of humanity. So the gene keys are these codes that relate to cosmic codes, which we might talk about later, I know, but the cosmic codes that the creation runs on. And so there are 64 keys. And again, that's an ancient teaching that's been around and has sneaked into many different lineages and also relates to our DNA, which is why my teachings are called the gene keys. But essentially, that's kind of where these teachings that I'm sharing in the world have their source. You know, so they come from a celestial place, you could say, from a very awakened place that was here many, many, many eons ago, but is still very much alive and kicking, and particularly forming itself anew in these times. So a lot of these teachings are coming back. I think Robert holds a great, large amount of them as well. So
that's what the Gene Keys feels like. Like when I open it and I read it, it feels like it doesn't come from here, but it is supporting us to guide us into a time that is beyond us. Yet it's like a familiarity at the same time. It's a really interesting paradox where we haven't really moved into it yet, but I remember it. Mm-hmm. And so the frequency of the words does feel very much hand in hand with what you're saying, is that it comes from a very heightened state of awareness that is then downloaded into this reality that is then supporting us with the rocket fuel of the direction that we're here to move in.
Yeah. So I'll just finish by saying that, you know, when I had this 3-day experience in my late 20s, I experienced the raw state of that presence as a pure awakened experience, as an embodied experience, rather than a set of teachings. It wasn't a set of teachings. It was an embodied, full-on experience of the universal truths. Mm-hmm. And it took me many, many years and decades to kind of try and then translate that into something that people would understand and that was useful. Because in its pure state, it was just that. Mm-hmm. It was just the presence of that being and its knowings and seeings and its omniscience, because that was the state I was in, a state of omniscience for 3 days. And anything I wanted to know, I could know, and anything I wanted to see, I could see, and from all times and space. And I can't explain that, and it sounds pretty wild to many people, I'm sure. But I made full use of those 3 days and those 3 nights in exploring everything I possibly could. And I'm still unpacking it. And so anyway, that's how I got here today. And that's my relationship to Hermes. Interested to hear yours.
Yeah. Well, I think Hermes is one of the names that I think of there are many names associated with Hermes. I think another name that could be associated with Hermes could be Enoch. I think another name that we could associate with it is Metatron. Another is Thoth. Another is Aeon. The ancient name of Heliopolis was actually Aeon. And the ancient name of the pyramid architect, even known by the current believers in the dynastic story for Egypt, was a fellow by the name of Aeon. So it literally was Hermes. And I think when I really started to get my awareness expansion, right, and started getting what I would, for lack of a better term, refer to as downloads. I remember the first time I heard the term download, I told someone who was in the kind of spiritual community, I said, I don't know what happened, but I just came up with all this math on here. And he's like, oh yeah, you got a download. I'm like, what is a download? I don't even understand what that is. And now I've got tens of thousands of pages of these downloads. And the source from whence these downloads came for me was Hermes. And I didn't know. So when Richard and I first met and I told him that, and then he told me the same thing, we're like, wait, what? Okay. And so then I knew that there was going to be some convergence between what he was working on and what I was working on. The beautiful thing about where we are in this transition to the next aeon, right, which is also a reference to a period of time, and this age of Aquarius, which I also titled in my last book, Polymath, I titled it The Aquarian Renaissance, right, the Aquarian Enlightenment. And this Aquarian Enlightenment, I believe, is accompanied by the water bearer, right? That's the story of the water bearer. that is actually Metatron. It is Hermes. It's Thoth. It's the reemergence of this concept of a God figure on earth. And that's what the transition from yin yang to yin shen yang actually is referenced to. So it's a middle way. It's a different, less polarized. It's being able to recognize the value of the polarity. It doesn't mean that you ignore it altogether. You realize the purpose that polarity plays. And I think that the 7 principles of Hermeticism teach us first and foremost that the universe is about mentalism. It's a mental universe. And then it goes into all the other aspects of that, like polarity, gender, right? Cause and effect, causality, all the things that we have kind of looked at the earth and said, wait, these are different principles that show up in language that comes to us from Newton, for example. Every action must have an equal opposite reaction. And that's true in physics also. And you could see these principles mirroring all over the place. Is it a coincidence that there's 50% of the population that would consider themselves conservatives and 50% of the population is going to consider themselves more liberal? Or is it just a function of this polarity that's built into the design of this giant school that we're in? And you could say that this is a school that was designed by Hermes. And that this school, and depending on your perspective, some would say, oh, it's a metatronic distortion because we're stuck in a cube of learning that is really difficult because in this school, we learn through experiencing the opposites. And as we experience the opposites of things, we actually can grasp the thing that we wanted to learn in the first place and why we're here. So in other words, if you want to learn what pleasure is like, you have to come here to experience pain until you no longer judge pain for what it is to you, but actually you start to realize that it's teaching you pleasure. And that might sound a little sadomasochistic, right? And so it's difficult for us to grasp until you actually go through the experience of it and realize that in the seed of every experience of love will be heartbreak as well. And they're literally musical tones. Hermes was famous on many levels. He's known as a god of wisdom. He's also known as a god in the Greek pantheon. He existed, across different pantheons from Sumeria all the way through to Egypt. Sumeria had 7 gods, right? And you've got Enki, and then that then translates over to Thoth in the Egyptian pantheon. And Thoth also sounds a lot like the word thought. So it's all based on this concept. And even the word Yahweh, which is the name of God, can actually be seen as THTH. And THTH in Hebrew, because there's no vowel in Hebrew that's represented in letter, it would just be pronounced Thoth, right? If that's how it were written to us in an anglicized form. So THTH, and in fact, THTH was one of the ways that was given by the Royal Arch Freemasons in the UK, back in the 1600s and 1700s, as a representation of this notion of Thoth. TH was one of the encrypted symbologies, right? And the ligature of those 2 letters that was used by Shakespeare and many others, Sir Francis Bacon, and those who actually penned what we today term as the King James translation of the Bible, which was done in 1611. So this has been a concept that has been permeating through time almost seamlessly from ancient wisdom keepers like Pythagoras all the way through to Plato, which was, 300 years later or 250 years later, and then have that go all the way through Aristophanes. You could take and track pretty much every polymath throughout history has been a devotee of Hermetic wisdom. And it's a different path that's about learning through experience, this experiential learning simulation, that we can learn how to fall in love with ourselves and our condition and turn this place into a heavenly experience. You don't escape Earth. There's no escape room game here. The only way we can transcend this experience is on the timeline that we've already determined through our higher self. I've said before that I believe that what we call destiny is actually just the free will of the higher self. So we determined to experience what we're experiencing so that we could provide the beauty of our gene keys. And the gene keys, to me, what I've learned about it is literally it's the higher dimension of what we would consider astrology and numerology. It's this nexus where they come together with a higher wisdom point. And so it's going to be something that all the people that are doing astrology and all the people that are doing numerology are going to start to get deeper and deeper into. And then also how that connects to the mathematics of the world around us as well is one of the ways that I hope to help contribute on this very exciting journey, because this is the human story. And as we go through this human story and we get closer and closer to the divine, we will see more and more symbologies of Hermes and Thoth popping up literally everywhere. And I experienced this just recently when I was in Egypt. We had never found any proof anywhere that the Giza Plateau complex, even though many believed because of reading the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and many believed the words that Thoth gave in that translation, or rather transmission that was given to us by Dorial, which he says, built I the great pyramid, right, of earth force, and lay in my sarcophagus, and I will reveal unto thee the mysteries, right, of the universe, of Thoth. So we had never found any evidence of this anywhere. But on this last trip, while we were in the smallest pyramid, which is actually the most holy of the three pyramids, Menkaure, which is like the Holy Spirit, it's like the mother, in the Mer-Ka-Ba. The Mer is the Great Pyramid, the Ka is Khafre Pyramid, and Mer was one of the original names of the Great Pyramid. And the Ba Pyramid is Menkaure Pyramid. And inside the King's Chamber, inside the Menkaure Pyramid, on the east wall, we found a tree of life that was placed in front of the tree of life was a staff of Hermes. So literally etched into the wall. And not only there, but in several locations around that room, but in particular with the focus on the east wall, because it's almost as described exactly in the Bible, which is not what we would consider the Bible today. The story of creation, the Garden of Eden story, is something that has been transcendent across many different, scopes of wisdom, from, going back to ancient texts and referencing these types of situations and circumstances in books like the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? This is a very, very ancient story about the Garden of Eden. And in the very end of that Genesis chapter 3, it's actually Genesis chapter 3, 24. It basically says, and God placed a cherubim and a flaming sword, right, to guard the way of the tree of life on the east side of the garden. So on the east wall is where we found it. So not only did we find the staff of Hermes there, we found them also in the Great Pyramid, this time etched into the walls with a very, very interesting and now familiar light etch. We also were able to confirm it on many sarcophagi, including the one in the King's Chamber, where I discovered the Alpha Omega before. And the Alpha Omega is just the separation of Hermes as a concept into masculine and feminine. So if you think about the symbol of Mercury is a circle that's the same as a Taurus sign. The head looks just like Taurus. And then the bottom is the Venus symbol, right? So it's a circle and then a plus underneath it, right? And when you look at the work of someone like John Dee, who wrote the Monas Hieroglyphica, he added also the symbol of Aries, right, at the base. So this is the Monas Hieroglyphica symbology. So you've got the Alpha and Omega, which is also signified by the Ankh. The Omega is also considered like the Ankh, like the fallopian tubes in uterus. And then you've got the Alpha, which is the bull. And the Great Pyramid is the house of Osiris. It is Bull Mountain. The Apis bull of the West. The great bull of the West is the reference to Osiris. The man who gets caught in this cycle of samsara and reincarnation over and over and over again, living in the duat, or the world of duality, learning through opposition, learning through the opposites. To experience life and to learn to transcend, see beyond it, and fall in love with it just as it is. As we get closer and closer to the divine, we will see more and more of these symbologies, because the water bearer is back. And it's going to open an entirely new world.
Thank you. And it's interesting for me to witness you tear up around the entire new world, because I think that that is what the entire new world is founded on, is our connection with our emotions and leading from the heart, no longer leading from the mind. So with that being said, I would be curious to hear from your perspective, Richard, around reincarnation. You mentioned it just in what you shared, of instead of sort of doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results, actually allowing ourselves to learn from where we have come from to actually pioneer a new future. And so based off of the Gene Key wisdom and what you have received in what has been, as we call it, downloaded into your consciousness, how do you feel like the weavings of the Gene Keys teaches us about reincarnation, and how can we utilize the memory from the past of where we're moving?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting subject, and one that's often avoided by many teachers. I think there's a stigma around it, and I'd like to kind of brush that away in a way, because when I was in the midst of some of my mystical experiences, at one point I saw through that third eye what I call the algorithms of incarnation. And that's where the mathematics comes in. I saw that the very structure of everything in this cosmos is mathematically based. And even though I don't have the training or the memory of the details of that as you do, I can feel it and see it and understand it through the resonance and through the geometries. And it's interesting to me that all of our breaths, our in-breaths and our out-breaths, are pairs, except for the first breath and the last breath, which are a pair. But also, the first breath you could say, is coupled with the last breath of the last life. And the last breath is the next inhalation for the next life. And so we are sandwiched in this construct, if you like, in this construct of time and space, where time moves in a certain way, like a river, and we perceive it as linear. And in actual fact, when we leave this form and we enter back into the spirit domain, time is experienced as it is, pure again and infinite. So that's why this notion of, when we think about incarnation, we're thinking of it from a linear term, because that's what we know. But when you exit that linear terminology, you realize that all lives have already been lived, and you've already lived in them, and the entire universe has already been lived. So at a very deep level, you could say everything is predestined. But at another level, the game is that we have forgotten. So we forgot. We that's the deal. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much fun if you were just living out and you knew what was going to happen. Where's the fun in that? Right. So at the deepest level, there is that mechanics and that mathematics of perfection through all those algorithms. And when you are able to expand your consciousness through many techniques that have been held by many yogis and teachers and teachings and yoginis and down the ages, you may be able to connect with some of those algorithms, both past and future, because they're memories. They can be released to us, inside us, as epiphanies or as revelations. It's a different way of coming to truth. Revelation is a very ancient way of coming to truth. It's not the same as the scientific method of moving incrementally. Revelation is all at once. So it's the right brain to the left brain in a way. And so that's been more my style of coming to truths. But I'm very interested in then mapping it against scientific principles and knowing, and to help us understand from both sides of the brain so that we can have a sense of completion. So seeing or remembering your algorithms can be a really powerful thing, and by expanding your consciousness. And as I said, the memory doesn't just move backwards, it moves forwards. And that's very hard for humans to understand. How can memory move forwards in time? But it does. And also, it's not just a line of future and past. Like when you're out of the form, you see the entire set of algorithms. So it's almost like you're looking down a kind of microscope at a kind of blade of grass or something, and it looks like it's just one thing. But when you go deeper and deeper into it, you see it's made up of just trillions of microfibers. And that's like incarnation. You're looking at all these tiny strings. And I'm really interested in superstring theory because it seems to be very resonant with this understanding of how reality is constructed through these threads and strings woven around each other. Same as our DNA. Everything is woven around each other. Even the word wound and wound are kind of interestingly connected, and woman, and all those. It's really interesting when you go deep into the etymology of some of these terms. So you have all these strings that are woven around each other, and they are all the lives that connect us from the beginning to the end. And I mean the beginning of creation, the Big Bang, to the end of this particular universe. But then you can also go out further and you go, well, the beginning of this universe also was an in-breath that was connected to an out-breath of the past universe. And so it never ends. That's the point. It's a never-ending story, consciousness. Mm. And that's also hard for us to comprehend, the eternal, the infinite. Because you get the only thing you can come to is this notion of play. The universe is just at play. And we're part of that play. And we're shown what we're shown. And we're landed in one of these things. And we're landed in a life. And we have to kind of remember what this life is, what is the karma, what is the teaching of this life that's connected to a past existence and a future existence, because it's never going to end. And sometimes I've had other polymaths who I've spoken to, not in your kind of caliber probably, who and skeptics. I love talking to skeptics, and I have some very good friends who are skeptics, and especially around the theme of incarnation and reincarnation. And I say, look, we look at space as fractal. We understand that the universe is a fractal universe, right? That when we look at, you cut open a grapefruit, and inside there is a map of a nebulae.
Self-similar.
Yeah, exactly. So you're going to see that at every scale throughout this universe. You're going to see these self-similar, replicating, endless patterns that have these same fractal kind of grids and flowers and shapes in them. So that's space. But actually, you have to then look at time as fractal as well. And that takes a slightly wider viewing kind of capacity. If time is fractal, then it means that everything that we're experiencing is kind of holographically connected to everything else. So every moment is an imprinting moment. And that's why things like the original teaching of Hermes, Trismegistus, and these was astrology in its pure form, because it's about timing. It's like every moment of time is an imprint, and it contains a relationship to a set of forces in the universe. So if you really understand that moment and you can map it and kind of unpick it, you'll see it's like a photographic imprint, and you can learn a huge amount from that imprint. And then, of course, that moment's gone, and there's another moment. And we're living inside these moments all the time, these imprinting moments, which are mathematical again. We have these ways of understanding timings now through, maths and astronomy and astrology. And, it's really interesting time to begin to map and numbering. Numbering is fascinating when you really get into the depths of the kind of core numbering systems. And Gene Keys is based on this number 64, which is a fractal, a classic fractal pattern that is embedded in the universe at every single level. It's the musical nature of the universe, the octave, 8 octaves, with the 64, that endlessly fractals out this symphony of life. And our incarnations are part of that symphony. So we're only allowed to see what we're allowed to see. If there are those like Blake who say, like, if you could see it all in a flash, it would be utterly overwhelming, because you'd see, that was what I saw. You would see everything all at once. And how do you contain that in a human body? I mean, you possibly could. I don't know. I was allowed to for 3 days, and then.
By the way, he's only 28.
Exactly. And then it was pulled away, and I was, luckily the door was left a bit ajar for me. So, but when the door is fully opened, it's quite overwhelming, and downloads aside. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts about incarnation. And there's some other things that I'd love to talk about, like how the avatar, I'll just say in a moment, like the avatar is like a golden thread.
Yeah.
Right. And so through all these threads and these, if you look at, again, you expand out and you go, there's all these threads of all these lives that are interconnected through time and space, all of us and everyone listening to this and watching this. You have a karma and a destiny to hear this in some way. And that's how it works. So everything crosses everything else at different times. We're threaded around each other. And then the further you go out, you realize, wow, we're weaving this incredible tapestry through time and space. All of us, all these great teachers. So the golden thread that came from that Hermes, that's passed through many of those teachers that you named, and one that I would also add is Fuxi, the great kind of originator of the I Ching, and Merlin might add as well. And,
absolutely.
The opening up of the Celtic kind of bardic codes, and you can find it in all kinds of places. Those are just some of my favorites. It's like this golden thread, as it passes an incarnation, as it goes across a fractal line, it's like everything it touches turns to gold. That's the avatar consciousness. So if an avatar consciousness at any point opens, if a portal opens for you and you have one of those experiences, your life is rerouted from that point onwards. It's just changed, because that gold starts to spread into your DNA and it starts to awaken you. And then it starts to awaken other people connected to you.
Yeah.
And then it starts to awaken other people connected to them. And that's how the golden thread touches in time and space, every single thread and every lifetime and every fractal. And it's moving down the fractal lines until everything has awakened to its true consciousness again. And it does it in threes. I'll leave it there because we can kind of come back to that.
That's fascinating, because I remember when we talked on the Zoom call, you talking about the golden thread.
Yeah.
And I immediately associated, and that's when I knew our work was really connected, because one of the things that I had realized is that I'll take this from a scientific angle just for a moment. I'll try not to get too confusing for people, but you may have heard of a fellow by the name of Niels Bohr. He's a famous physicist who in the 1930s, he's a Danish physicist. He was friends with Einstein, but also, a contemporary and somewhat competitor to Einstein to a certain extent. He was more on the quantum physics side of things, and what we now call traditional or standard, mechanics and physics is really more along the lines of what Einstein had kind of innovated. Einstein spent the last, 30 years of his life trying to solve gravity and how it could be connected to electromagnetism. And he didn't succeed. I mean, he succeeded at a lot of other things, but he wasn't able to convince the community around it. He supported a paper that was written by his two compatriots, or rather two colleagues, Kaluza and Klein, which tried to put forward a fifth dimensional understanding, mathematical explanation for gravity. It sounds like you have studied this and you kind of know about it, because I know you like Walter Russell. So, and Walter Russell in 1926 wrote a treatise that debunked Einstein to the world, and it got published. I mean, he wrote 1,500 letters to the top universities around the world saying that, wait a minute, light doesn't actually travel.
I love that one. It's my favorite one-liner.
And it's like, what a great one-liner, because it's like, wait a minute, that implies there must be an ether. And he's right. Light doesn't travel.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people would go, wait, how does light not travel? Well, the way that light doesn't travel is that literally, let's imagine we're in a stadium, right? We're in a football stadium, and we go to a football game, and then someone starts a wave, right? And we go around the stadium with the wave. All you do when the wave energy comes to you is you stand up and then you sit down again, right? So there's an on excitation and an off excitation. But then the wave passed through you. You didn't actually travel. You didn't move around the stadium. The energy of the wave moved around the stadium. The wave perturbation moved around the stadium. It's the exact same thing with water and molecules of water. It's the exact same thing with light and particles of light we call photons.
The waves of the ocean.
That's right, the waves of the ocean. So if there's an earthquake in Japan and there's a wave, and that's exactly how this golden thread thing works too. It's in the exact same way. The way this wave is then touching on everybody and then turning everyone golden, right? So if there's a big earthquake in Japan, like in Fukushima, right, that they had, eventually the tidal waves can actually make their way all the way to California. And I remember back in 2011 looking at the ocean and saying, wow, the waves are really big, because that was how large of an earthquake it was. And I asked myself the question, well, does that mean that the water molecules from Japan actually made their way all the way over here? And I started studying into it more and more, and I realized, no, the only thing that the water molecules did was the same thing you do in a stadium, is stand up and sit down. So Walter Russell was right. Now, we can extend this further and say that Niels Bohr came with a theory, but because he was Danish and that was more Germanic, it was less popular at the time. And his theory was more about quantum physics, and one that said, and this actually survived, the Bohr atom model gave us the way to determine the exact light frequencies of hydrogen. And it was perfect. So from that, they were able to figure out that lambda and 1 over lambda were giving us the reflection and the absorption of hydrogen. Now, if we look through a telescope and look out into the cosmos to see where hydrogen is, do you know how we would find it? Do you know how we'd find it?
Tell us.
We would use spectroscopy. We would look to see where the light reflections in the universe would be matching the exact, what we would call reflection spectral analysis of hydrogen, because we know what hydrogen looks like. We know the colors that it emits. It's got like one line of blue, one line of red, a line of purple. There's different colors that associate directly with hydrogen. And when we see that combination, we know it's hydrogen. We know that it's hydrogen. Now, the rest of the universe to hydrogen is 1 over that. So that means that all the colors that are absorbed by hydrogen, not reflected, are what is in the universe around it. Now take that metaphor, right, and apply it to yourself. Because what are we made up of? We are made up of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. That's DNA. DNA is our light signature. And no DNA has ever existed like yours before, and not exactly the same. It's 99% the same as a chimpanzee. Good news. But that 1% difference makes you entirely different than everybody else, ever before and ever again. So this light signature that you have, that's entirely unique to you and never replicated, is why you are here. You are here. And we all get stuck in this mode of thinking, oh, I'm going to change my name now to One Divine, because now the actor that was Robert Grant is no longer here, right? Or the actor that was Jim Carrey is no longer here. And we go through this stage. And last time I was here, we talked about the whole stages of awakening that was in the Matthew McConaughey meme, right? And we laughed about that. And there's a stage that you get to that says, I'm One Divine, or I'm like so-and-so light. I'm going to change my name altogether because I no longer want to associate with the person that was my persona prior to my awakening. When actually the true individuation process is anathema to that. The true individuation process is about embracing your absolute uniqueness and understanding it. We all spend time as children thinking, oh, I need to get rid of the things that are different from everybody else because I want to fit in with the crowd. We succumb to peer pressure, right? We want to change aspects of our personality and make ourselves different and hide other aspects of ourselves. In my case, when I decided I was going to be a serious business person and a CEO, I wasn't going to be a musician anymore. I wasn't going to be an artist anymore. I was still an artist and I was still a musician, but I never talked about it and I repressed it. So what we start to realize as we go through this awakening process is that the very reason we are here is to experience the universe through our unique perspective. And that unique perspective in our eyes of vision provides vital information to the growth of overall consciousness in the universe. That the consciousness of the universe is expanding as a result of our unique signature, our unique light imprint. That unique light imprint is what we talk about in gene keys. The 64 codons, right, that associate with our, all of our amino acid production, everything that comes out of our DNA in the transfer RNA process, which is literally a binary code. I mapped it mathematically, is directly related to the I Ching. So here's a metaphysical tie to our solid biology, but maybe we're not solid at all. Because if light doesn't actually travel, then if I'm moving my hand around like this, then all that's really happening is each cubic segment of space-time is re-replicating my hand as I move it around. And the only thing that stops me from being able to put my finger straight through it is a belief system that limits us to believing this illusion. And this is a fact of an etheric realm, right? A unified field of information. Now, all of this, your light signature can be derived all the way down to a numerical system. And I believe that numerical system is found directly in the simplicity of your birthday, your date, not only your date of birth, but the time of birth, your name transformed into gematria, and also your location of birth transformed into gematria. That creates a pretty long number. And then that number in its nearest prime number becomes your life as a personage. That's who you are. Now, if you take 1 over that number to find its absorption, right? Because that would be its reflection. Take 1 over that number to find its absorption, you will have a very long number with a period of repetition. And that repetition will exist over and over and over again through all your lifetimes of karma, right? Of resolution, of learnings, until you finally learn to fall in love with all of it. All of those different lifetimes of you are happening right now. Time is not linear. It is a torus that repeats and loops on itself. And so when we understand this, then we realize, wait, I am what I've been looking for. It's not that I have to change. I don't have to become more ideal. The way I become my ideal is by realizing that I'm already ideal. And this realization is the most powerful thing that we can experience. And then there's a moment when we have that experience that number becomes golden. Now, what do I mean by golden? Well, the golden ratio is a number that we all have heard about. Anyone in the spiritual community kind of probably knows about the golden ratio. It's a number that's 1.61803398887. And I could go on and on and on into infinity. It never ends. It's like pi. It never stops. If there's a black hole and a white hole, the popular thesis around the mathematics of a black hole and white hole is the golden ratio. Why? Why would it be the golden ratio? Because it's a hole in space-time that is equivalent on both sides. So the golden ratio is the only number that when you subtract 1 from it, it still is the exact same mantissa or decimal extension. So if you take 1.61803398887 minus 1 is still equal to its reciprocal value, which is 0.61803398887, and identically the same forevermore. That is a golden ratio that is only a property, we thought, of that particular number. And that's why it is the foundation of all art. It's the foundation of how we deem beauty. We look at the waist to hip ratio on a woman, and it's going to be approximately 0.618. The waist will be compared to the hips. The distance in men that you would look at between their pupils is 0.618, the distance between their temples. The lips, this is one of the things people mess up a lot, I think, especially in the LA area, when they get like too much injected in their lips. The bottom lip should be 1.618, the ratio of the top lip. And so understanding these mathematical ratios is how we're actually at a subconscious level realizing the signature of the divine, the creation of God. The number of, even on fake trees, the number of branches that show up, right, on trees will always be the Fibonacci number series, right? So what is actually happening when we become golden? There's a way to transform a number, and it's very simple. You could take any number, square it, right? Actually, you cut it in half first. You take any number, cut it in half, and then from there, you square it and add one, the one representing the divine, and then take its square root. And then that number will give you a boundary condition that starts with the distance between each of those numbers and their 1 over x forms will be exactly the same as the number that you would basically just cut in half, right? And its 1 over x will have an identical mantissa, just like the golden ratio. And now we learned that this can be done on every number. This means that every single number, every unique number, can turn into a divine numerical expression where it breaks the cycle of samsara. It's now an infinite irrational number. It's you in your golden ratio. We all have a number. So if I take my birthday, for example, mine is 516, right? 1969. So it would be 5161969. I was born at 1803, 1803. And then take my name in gematria. That's going to give you a numerical expression. Take my location of my birth, also in gematria. And then I take that number and I cube it for this dimension. Third dimensional frame. So that number cubed becomes, for me, 5.16 cubed comes out to 137. 137 is a very, very important number, right? Especially in esoteric. And my birthday happens to also be on leap years, the 137th day of the year. Is that just a coincidence? I don't know. Interestingly, that's also 1 minus the golden ratio, right? Multiplied by 360 degrees gives you 137 as well. But the point that's interesting about this is that I have been living in this cycle of samsara, living this pattern of repetition, experiencing the same results and the same consequences and reacting in the same ways over and over and over again until I finally realized that that's not what I wanted anymore. But if you continue to react to the stimulus that you receive in the same way and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity. So this is where the shift happens and the golden thread comes in, and everybody has it already embedded within their numerical expression and light signature that's in their DNA.
So we just went really far out and then really deep in. And I think what's so fascinating about the two of you is the math and the poetry and how they weave together in a tapestry that sort of like encompasses this human experience from a very far out concept and the very fine, intricate detail and depth in which we live in this reality, and yet also the simplicity and how they sit side by side. So with that being said, because that's a lot of numbers, Robert, like we went, like it's a lot of numbers and it all really comes back to a very simple truth.
We're all just divisions of the number one.
Exactly. It comes back to number one being the universe and spirit and the divinity. So with that being said, I would love to gift the listeners something tangible that they can bring forward into their world that you believe is necessary with the direction, the shift that is happening in consciousness right now on our planet. We see it left, right, and center, so that we can sit after this podcast and go, okay, we live in a really profoundly, wildly complex yet simple reality and universe. Now, what can I do to shift my internal experience to then be able to serve the direction that we're moving into that is founded from a place of oneness? Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Hermes, again, going back to Hermes, was also the god of alchemy. And what Robert's talking about is alchemy through numbers, right? The turning of base metal into gold. That's what we're talking about, right? We're talking in at many dimensions, at many levels, symbolically and numerologically. And when through the Gene Keys, what I've done with my poetic science, I guess, I've looked at DNA through a poet's eyes, because I am essentially a poet. That's what I always wanted to be. I was, it doesn't mean I write only poetry. It means I attempt to live a poetic life, and I see things poetically. And to see things poetically is to see beauty, basically, in as many places as you can, especially in ugly places. And so we have to start by looking inside the ugly places inside us, which in Gene Keys we call the shadows, the shadow state. So everyone kind of knows the places, right now listening to this, if you just close your eyes for a moment and you just think, well, where is the ugliest place inside me right now? What is you might not call it ugly, but it's like, where's the big challenge? What is it? Oh, I know what it is instantly. You know what it is. You know where it is. There's something you're grappling with that is, a grain in the oyster. But that shadow pattern, which you are attempting to resolve, or you might be not attempting, you might be trying to distract yourself from it. If you give it space inside your being, if you give it time, if you allow it some compassion, if you treat yourself gently, if you watch it, if you bring mindfulness and awareness to it, you will see it begin to transform. And that's the case with any shadow pattern, any victim pattern that we are playing out, like you said, going round and round in circles in the samsara loop. You have to see it. This is the point of meditation. It's the point of contemplation. Contemplation is the word the technique I use, because it doesn't involve necessarily closing your eyes. You can create the contemplative state doing absolutely anything in your daily life. And so I, through the art of contemplation, teach how to bring that state, that interior awareness into everything in your life, into beginning by taking little pauses throughout your day so that you can begin to create that space. And lots of little pauses interconnected starts to create quite a lot of space, and it creates more time also in your day, which is an irony, really, because you're pausing. So you might think that you're losing time, but actually you're pumping more time into your day. It's a strange paradox, because you're stopping, you're pausing. And you can, when I say pause, you can pause and still be in motion. You're pausing in your mind loops, in your struggles, in your old patterns, so that you can see them clearly, and you're creating space around them and compassion and gentleness. And that's what begins to create this new number, this kind of flower beginning to open out of the shadow, out of the very thing that you've been avoiding, ends up being this great gift. So in Gene Keys, it's all three levels: the shadow, the gift, and then the highest level, which would be, so you have the seed is the shadow, the flower is the gift that's hidden in the seed, in the shadow. So every shadow, every difficulty in our life is really asking us to do some alchemy. There's something powerful in that. And the most difficult thing in your life has the most potential if you have the courage to give it some space and really look at it. That means you have to be authentic, and you have to be so honest with yourself. Mm-hmm. That's a process. You might need support as well. And then the final aspect is what I call the siddhi, which is a Sanskrit word, because there wasn't a word in English for that I could find. You could say essence, divine essence. Siddhi means like divine treasure, or it's the genetic enlightened expression of a specific part of your nature. So everyone, when they become fully awake, has a completely different expression. So when you look at the Gene Keys, there's 64 of them, and you look down the line of the language that is for the siddhis, you'll see all these words for compassion, rapture, ecstasy, perfection, beauty, humility. And you'll see they're all describing the same state, but through a slightly different lens, and so understanding that every shadow contains one of those siddhis inside it. It's like it's hidden in there. It's the fruit in the seed. And you might think that's a long way away. The seed is tiny, and it's going to go into a tree, and then it's going to have to go through all this and fruit, and then you get this beautiful fruit. And the fruit, of course, contains another seed, which is a beautiful metaphor in itself. But that is in that metaphor is life. And you don't, by creating that contemplative space inside you, those pauses so that you can begin to look at these difficult patterns, that's all you have to do. That's all the ancients have actually ever taught. So we can go off into like quantum realities and describe it all, but actually it comes down to just that mindfulness, just that spaciousness, so that the pattern has space to transform. And then it can transform really quickly as well. Like you can go from a seed to a tree really fast, because awareness is the water and the nutrition and the nourishment that allows that whole process to happen. And then you're left with this fruit, this juicy ecstasy of biting into this mango or whatever your favorite fruit is. And it was all along there. That golden thread, that golden awareness, that awakening, it was there all along. As you said, it was in the numbers. It was just hidden in the thread, in the stream. And we just had to unlock it. And that's what the keys are. And that's what the keys of Enoch were. And that's what all these ancient teachings are about. The I Ching and chakras and the Vedic systems and, the Kabbalist systems and all the systems. Like you and I probably explored most of them together between us,
over lifetimes.
But you get to see this same golden thread in every single one, but just taught in a different way. Like think of the Sufis, the Sufis in the Middle Eastern deserts. They had more words for love than any other tradition. They came up with, like the Eskimos have different words for snow. The Sufis had different words for love, just layers and layers and layers of words in their language to describe different aspects of love, because that's all they wanted to see was love. There's kind of love that's full of angst and desire and misery, but it's still love. And then there's love that's at the highest level of divine annihilation and oneness with the cosmos. That's also love. So it's all about love, ultimately. Self-love begins with. So creating space in your life through a contemplative practice, and I would say ultimately learning to be gentle with yourself, is the greatest secret I've ever learned. And I learned one day, a passing avatar came past and just whispered in my ear, "Do you want to know what awakening is?" Yeah. It's a series of softenings. And that went into me so deep. I was like, wow, you just have to go on softening your heart. Beautiful. And then the mind opens and everything begins to just kind of transform. And then those higher states are just there. They're revealed. They're underneath. So I guess that's my answer. Mm-hmm. Love to hear yours.
Okay. So just a little disclaimer, due to the nature of we have to be out and go into the rehearsal of our event, we are unfortunately really limited on time. So I would love to hear your perspective on this piece, to put a beautiful bow on this conversation of an extraction from your lens of what it is that we can cultivate within our being to move forward.
I think it's very in line with what you just said, Richard. Like Alan Watts, I believe that mankind only suffers because he takes too seriously what the gods made for fun. We're all too hard on ourselves. And that's one of the ultimate things we're here to learn through this series of softenings. When I was young, everything was black and white. And by the time I was 22, I thought my parents had learned so much genius in 7 years because I thought they were really stupid when I was 15. And what I learned through time is that there's gradients and different colors, and the whole spectrum of possibilities could now be applied to a lot of the things that I thought were absolutely starkly held ethical dilemmas when they're not. And that's one of the things that I think is so critically important, is that we learn to look at ourselves in the mirror, not for the things we don't like about ourselves, but rather to see us as the divine incarnation that we actually are, and not to worry about all the things that you are not. If you want to repress anything inside you, as you repress those things inside you of who you are, And this is what I love about Gene Keys. It gives you a pathway to that golden thread. That's how I see Gene Keys. It gives you the pathway. It makes astrology actionable at the persona, subconscious, and the nexus between those two, which becomes a superconscious mind. To me, it's all about learning how to accept and to love the circumstance and everything, and not judge the things negatively within yourself, because the things you don't like, and I remember you said this at Conscious Life Expo, and I reposted it because I loved it, because you were talking about, if you really want to change the world, then change what's inside of you, because all of that, trauma, all the challenge, all the judgment, all the dense energy that we hold within us is why it gets reflected in the world around us. We will continue to experience everything that we judge, because we attract everything we judge, until we no longer judge everything we attract. And if we can accept within ourselves the beauty, the divine within, then the world around you starts to reflect that same incredibly powerful, luminescent beauty. And I think that's what I would say is the one key takeaway. Don't be so hard on yourself. The world's not a difficult place because people hate each other as much as it is a difficult place because people hate themselves. Mm-hmm. It's time to start loving ourselves.
I feel so unbelievably yet believably blessed and honored to be in the presence of both of you and to hear your wisdom and your perspective on reality, and to witness for the first time ever your understandings of our experience of being human to weave together and see how they are so extremely complementary, and yet one rooted in maths for the most part, and one rooted in poetry and the exploration of the different states from the shadow, the gift, into the city, and see how it always comes back to the same point. And so what I see to be so valuable is that every single person on this planet is going to perceive reality completely differently. Just under 8 billion people on the planet, or just over right now. And every single individual having a very completely different experience of this reality. And so when people say like, well, you don't live in reality, I'm like, well, whose reality are we operating from here? Mm-hmm. And recognizing all of us have our own internal reality, therefore projected out into this experience. And then ultimately, individually, when we start to all believe a similar thing or have a similar narrative that may be rooted in fear, then that is the very thing that's project out into the collective consciousness. And so the wars within our own mind are the wars that we see on this planet. And so when we end the wars within our own mind of the way that we speak to ourselves, we will start to see the wars on this planet end. And so what I love to hear and experience in this conversation is very different perspectives that actually are very complementary and connect. And so this is the invitation for anybody listening to it, that every single person on this planet has access to the city, the heightened state, the essence, the divine essence of the enlightened aspect and perspective of our reality. And yet we must get curious enough, which is the inverse, to go down in and then up into our highest essence and expression. And that curiosity is going to be the golden thread that leads us home into our heart of who we've actually always been this whole time. And so thank you, both of you, for your wisdom, your devotion, your teachings and your sharings that have led us to this point to be able to have this very important conversation. And my gosh, I wish that we could have another 2 hours of unpacking, but I do just believe that this is just the start. So thank you to both of you for being here and bringing your wisdom and for gracing the Deja Blu podcast. This is truly a dream come true. And I know that it is just a seed planted for future collaboration.
Thank you for putting us together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You put me together with so many people already, and I'm just amazed by how you know exactly what things fit together. I think that's one of your great talents.
Yeah, you are.
You know how to put the Legos together.
Yeah.
You definitely do.
I just feel the essence of who you are, and then I see how they overlap and complement each other. And I think that this is really what it's about, is that we're no longer here to be in our own individual canoes, but it's about recognizing we're actually all floating in the same direction. So what would it look like if we brought our canoes together? And that's really the more beautiful world than our hearts can even know is possible is when we actually do this together. And so it is my highest joy, greatest excitement is weaving brilliant humans in the same space and then just watching magic unfold and sitting front row with the popcorn.
On that note.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Beautiful humans, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Deja Blu podcast. I am constantly amazed at the consciousness that this podcast has and how he chooses to weave and continuing to blow my mind as I sit front row witnessing the mystery of the unfolding of this podcast. So thank you so much. None of this would be possible if you weren't tuning in. So if you resonate with today's episode, please go ahead and share it on your Instagram stories. Tag people, send it to those that you love or you believe that will be able to extract wisdom from today's episode. And thank you for doing the necessary work for you to be a vibrational match to get to the very end of this episode. Without you, it is not possible. Your unique fingerprint. No one does you better than you do you. So recognizing that your uniqueness is your superpower, and may today's episode be yet another permission slip for you to rock the majesty and the perfection of who you came here to be and who you've always been since birth. Until next week, sending you so much love.